Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Haifong. I am joined by war correspondent and independent journalist Elijah Magnier. Everyone hit the like button as you come on. That helps boost this show in YouTube's algorithm. But Elijah, welcome back.
Hello, and thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, Elijah, I wanted to get right to the developments here, especially the blockade. I wanted to ask you about this, okay? Because this comes on the heels of this so-called ceasefire, and I wanted to ask you first your reactions to it seems like this blockade is underway. Reports from Al Jazeera say there's over 10,000 U.S. forces, a number of destroyers and ships sailing around the Strait of Hormuz, not in the Strait of Hormuz, sailing around it. And essentially, what has happened, though, is that both Iran and China and other related ships have been actually getting through, at least 4 in the last day, including 2 that actually visit Iranian ports, which the promise of the blockade was to hit these ships like he did, like the Trump administration did Venezuela, if they were to dock and load up on Iranian ports. And at least 3 others have crossed the Strait of Hormuz since this blockade essentially began. Maybe you can help the audience understand, Elijah, what role does this blockade now have in this war, and how is Iran and, of course, its partners and friends, China being the biggest, condemning this and also making good on its word that it was going to continue to sail through the Strait of Hormuz and do what it needed to do with Iran? Uh, what does this all mean? Where are we at right now in this war?
I need I need to give a little bit of background first for people to just be able to follow. So we have a 40 days war, and then we have the Americans coming up with the different narrative, different objectives, not able to meet the objectives. They told us they want a regime change. They failed. They said they destroyed the Iranian missile system. They failed because Iran was still launching missiles until they acknowledged that actually the Iranians are defending themselves and the Israelis and the Americans are unable to achieve their objectives. This is why they agreed to go to Islamabad for the first round of talks. Now, that's interesting because this is where everything started. We have, at the end of the talks, the US Vice President Vance saying that these talks have failed. In my opinion, these talks did not fail. They were not destined to reach an agreement from the first time they meet after 40 days of very brutal war. So they were supposed to exchange ideas, set the limits, try to elbow one another, try to test the limits of one another. And then we have something interesting coming from Donald Trump. He's saying, I don't accept 90%. I don't accept 95%. I want 100%. That says a lot because it means they have reached more or less the 90% of the limit what Donald Trump wanted and what the Israelis wanted. Because at the end of the day, this is an Israeli negotiation meeting. This is an Israeli war. It's not an American war. And then the Americans decided to set up a blockade around Iran. Now, this is not working, and we have seen today in the first hours of the blockade the movement of the shipments. The Americans cannot stop the Iranian oil being sold to China because then the Americans are endangering the national security of China because the Chinese economy and energy represent the red line for China. Therefore, the Americans are caught now between not being able to implement the blockade until the end as they wished, but at the same time, we see the Iranians not being very harsh on the movement and the passage within the Strait of Hormuz. And then we have an information coming out that actually Both sides are going to meet, maybe in Vienna, maybe in Geneva, but in a European country. They're not going to meet in Islamabad. And the Americans, by accepting to meet in a European country, actually they're trying to regain the relationship with the Europeans. And what is the conclusion about what's happening today? We have a ceasefire that is still holding. We have the gathering of forces that has no purpose really, but to show a force that is not going to deter Iran and make it change its mind. This is why we see there is a space within only 2 days of the announcement of the failure, or what the Americans said is a failure of the negotiations. Then we have a second meeting happening this week in the next few days, which means that all this blockade actually is not working and is not going to work. Not because this will not affect Iran. It will affect Iran, but will not cripple it because Iran has a railway with China through Uzbekistan. They have railway reaching the Caspian Sea. They have the supply line with Russia open. They have 7 countries bordering Iran. The line with Turkey is very active. So they can really bother the Iranians like they have been doing for the last 47 years, but this is not going to give the effect that Donald Trump wants us to believe. So at the end of the day, he is trying, but then he's going to go back to the negotiation. Is that a good thing for the Americans? Yes, because it offers a ladder for Donald Trump to come down the tree he climbed on. For Iran, because Iran is in a defensive position, but not for Israel, who wanted the chaos in Iran.
Yeah, those are all great points, Elijah. I guess my question then is why? Why were these ships allowed to pass? Because some have noted that perhaps U.S. forces are not ready to interdict these ships just yet, given the rapid nature in which this blockade was called, declared, and acted upon. While others have noted that there may be deeper reasons to it, especially given that Saudi Arabia right now we're hearing is actually begging essentially through back channels for Trump to stop this. Given all the news we've heard, maybe you can comment on too about the situation in the region, the Gulf region in particular, being very bad in terms of exactly what the Strait of Hormuz is all about, or has been all about, which is the shipments, the trade, and the movement and flow of oil and other precious commodities for the global economy, which now have become a major part of this war.
Now, this war has offered Iran a new leverage card, which is the Strait of Hormuz. That was not the case before the war. For Iran, this is a great source of income because it can bring between 70, 80 to 90 billion dollars a year, which is quite a lot, equal more or less to the income from selling the gas, the energy and the oil. Now, for the Gulf countries, this is a problem because they will have to end up increasing the price of oil, and it's no longer going to be competitive in comparison to the Venezuelan oil, for example. Even if there is a difference of quality, in particular the Kuwaiti oil, that is the most expensive one, and the Venezuelan is very heavy, but it will create a disturbance in the market, in the energy market. But what's happening with the Gulf countries? First, they are extremely angry with Iran, and the level of hate toward Iran has never reached this level. Nevertheless, on the other hand, they understand now that the Americans are incapable of defending themselves because they did not protect their own bases. They are incapable of defending the Arab countries where they have offered bases for the Americans, spending billions of dollars. The Qatari spent 11 billions to Al Adid military and air base. So all this, it turned out to be really useless because the Arabs needed to spend on their interception missile system to defend themselves and the US bases. and they have to go and buy more missile systems to defend the American bases and themselves because the Americans have put all their effectives in Israel. And this is not their war. They were not consulted to start a war, for the Americans to start a war, and they were not consulted even when the Americans decided to go and sit with the Iranians and they show their limitations. For the Arabs, it was, for some of them, like Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis, they wanted to finish off Iran. But this didn't happen, which means that now they have to deal with Iran that is going to say, rightly, I have managed to stand up against two of the most powerful armies in the world, the Americans in the world and the Israelis in the region, and still alive, and the Iranian ruling system is still intact. And the Iranians show a high resilience by renewing the leadership on the first and the second level immediately and continue the war. For the Arabs now, they have to deal with Iran, but they also have to find an alternative to the Strait of Hormuz that is going to require a lot of investment, like the one of the Saudis through the Yonbur oleoduct going toward the Red Sea. But even that is vulnerable because Ansarullah in Yemen are sitting on a corner of Bab el-Mandeb, and they can shut down that. So the message to the Arabs today, they really have to establish security agreement with Iran to make sure that the people of the region can look after their own security, which is something that Jawad Zarif, the Iranian former foreign minister, when he was inactive in the Iranian administration under President Rouhani, proposed exactly this to the Arabs, to set up a security agreement where they look after their own securities. So for now, the Americans are behaving in a way disregarding completely the interest of the Arabs and looking only after the interest of Israel, which is going to bring more logic, not love. There will never be love and good ties between the Arabs and Iran. But the logic is to establish a relationship sufficient enough to create a kind of balance in the security agreement.
Yeah, well, that's a far different arrangement, Elijah, than what we've had, especially in the last month and a half, but everything leading up to it. And so I guess my next question to you is, does this mean that the Trump administration, the US, and even Israel in some respects, given its dependency on the US in so many ways, is on the retreat now, despite all of this talk about the blockade and obliterating ships if they, end up passing through, and that they'll hit all of Iran's fast attack ships, all of this? Does this simply mean that actually the opposite is happening? The United States is gearing up and is preparing to settle this conflict, given that all of these developments you laid out are very unfavorable for the United States. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the Americans would like to show their muscles to the Iranians in this blockade, and they would like to clash with the Iranians to a certain point just to show the world how they can sink this ship or that ship, or they have intercepted a tanker or whatever. They want to demonstrate something. For the Iranian side, they're not going to give them the possibility or the chance to do so because Iran has been reacting but not taking the initiative to attack. And the Americans have been taking the initiatives to attack all the time. This is how this war has started. So if the Americans want to keep the pace as it is today, as we have seen, no clashes, no provocations. We've seen the Americans keeping at least 200 kilometers away from the Iranian limits around the Shahba port. That is, by the way, is run by the Indian. It's not run by the Iranians. There's an agreement with India. So the blockade against it's not against Iran, it's against China, India, and other parties who are buying the Iranian oil. For Iran, it's really careless. Iran is more or less careless about the American decisions because 30% of the Chinese oil come from Iran, and Iran is selling around 1.5 million barrels per day to China. With the increase of the price of the barrel, it falls into the advantage of Iran and Russia, by the way, that plays a very important role. So for that, the Americans so far are not provoking the Iranians, and vice versa. So what we see today is more talk toward uh, a possibility of meeting, where they will meet, what is the agenda, what are the concessions one side will give to another. So, for example, the Iranians are saying we can stop enriching uranium because we have enough for 5 years. So we can stop for 5 years and you can inspect our program. Exactly, we are back to the JCPOA 2015 set up by Obama, but Donald Trump cannot stick this word that a nuclear deal um, concluded between Barack Obama and Iran. So he's trying to do something different, which is more or less exactly the same. Obama said 10 years for no enrichment beyond 3.75 and 20%. Donald Trump is going to say exactly the same, but he's saying 20 years just to show that he can reach the double. For Iran, as long as Iran is capable of enriching 3.75 and 20% for medical and research, it's enough. In fact, the 60% were only a response to Donald Trump, who pulled out of the JCPOA 2018 in March 2018, and in March 2019, Iran started to enrich to a level beyond the 20%. So it is easy for Iran to reach an agreement over the nuclear dossier. However, it will never accept any agreement over the missile because that is Iran's only way to defend itself. Without the missiles, in the last 40 days, we would have seen Iran completely destroyed. And the relationship with the allies, that is sovereign. Nobody can tell any country with whom they can be friend with or not. So at the end of the day, now, as I see it today, without any provocations, that the situation actually is not as bad as the Americans would like us to think.
Yeah, I saw you reporting on this. China being the first to break the blockade, Iran not holding back on continuing its shipments and its activities in the Strait of Hormuz just because the United States made these threats. And so, from here, Elijah, I guess a lot of what happens next and what's happening now is the exchange still of terms of this war. How will what are these terms, and how will these terms either change or not change, given now the U.S. I mean, this has happened before during the Trump administration, blockades, Venezuela, etc., having varying degrees of success. Iran is a different situation. And so now, with the talk of more talks, I'm seeing Pakistan maybe as being another venue where they could happen. I guess I'm curious about your thoughts on Iran's. Right now, Iran has a certain set of demands, including Lebanon, which I know you've been following closely. Fighting is still happening there. Hezbollah is very active, and the Israelis are continuing to strike Lebanese civilians and infrastructure. How does this all play out now that this blockade seems to be ineffective and essentially confronted pretty directly by Iran and China and the rest of its friends?
It's important to recognize that Benjamin Netanyahu managed to divide the two fronts, the Iranian and the Lebanese fronts. And he was mainly helped by the Lebanese president and prime minister who rejected any inclusion of Iran into the deal and to speak in the name of the Lebanese people to force a ceasefire upon Israel. So the Lebanese came out, say nobody negotiates on our behalf, which is right. Iran was not negotiating on their behalf, but was imposing a ceasefire that the Lebanese said, no, even that we don't want. And actually, while we are talking, there is a meeting between the Israelis and the Lebanese in Washington at the US Foreign Ministry, Secretary of State. So the meeting, the Lebanese are going to completely naked. They have no leverage. They cannot offer anything to Israel but the skin of Hezbollah. And to offer Hezbollah on the table for the Israelis is not something that the Lebanese government can do because the Israelis are incapable of killing or destroying or disarming Hezbollah. And the Lebanese government is very weak, not in a strong position to do so. So basically, the president and the prime minister really put themselves in a very awkward situation where the way out is only a picture with the Israeli ambassador and the Lebanese ambassador in Washington, and the Israelis asking them to disarm Hezbollah before they can talk to them. So that is one side. How it's going to play out for Iran? Because of the Lebanese said, we will deal with ourselves, then Hezbollah and Israel will continue fighting. And this fight is going to continue, it's not going to stop, not in the next week, because the Israelis want to occupy the village of Bint Jbeil and create another kind of security zone, but not made of villages, made of completely destroyed villages similar to Rafah. This is what the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz promised at the very beginning of the renewal of this conflict, saying we will turn all these villages to exactly the same way we have turned Rafah, which is completely destroyed. It's a flat area with nothing. So it means that tens of thousands of Lebanese will be completely homeless. And it doesn't mean that by doing so for the Israelis, there will be security. Hezbollah will not stop fighting. Controlling the land by the Israelis is one thing, and defending it, remaining without being harassed, is something else. Hezbollah today has turned into a resistant force. It's not a Qassi army. It is a force that is dedicated to one objective, to harass the occupation forces. And for that, they can do that for decades.
Yeah. Elijah, do you see any scenario where, how I'm seeing this develop, is the Trump administration of the United States appears to be, while talking a very harsh and big kind of war game, it's engaged in a ceasefire, and even its blockade, as you wrote, and maybe you can elaborate on this too, might hurt Iran, but it also won't break it, and it's probably the case that the United States administration knows this. Do you see any scenario where the U.S. essentially tries to broker a settlement with Iran in order to get out of the mess that it essentially made and can't really continue, while Iran, given what you just laid out with Lebanon and Hezbollah, actually re-engages with Israel, because that has been the promise by Iran, and Iran has this demand, as you said, in the ceasefire terms. Well, the ceasefire is fast approaching that 2-week expiration, and of course, Israel is showing very few signs of letting up. Actually, those signs you mentioned of what it is, how it is reacting, is quite the contrary. So, your thoughts on this?
So basically, what US Vice President Vance told us is quite important. he said the negotiations have failed. But then we have the Israeli Prime Minister Donald Trump. Sorry, Israel. Well, yeah, he is the Israeli Prime Minister. But Benjamin Netanyahu saying that I receive a report daily from the U.S. administration, and that Vice President Vance contacted him on his way back to Washington to tell him about the news. And Netanyahu called Vance during the meeting in Islamabad, which means Benjamin Netanyahu has no problem in offending the American people and the American administration by saying, well, actually, the American administration report to me about what's happening so I can tell them what to do, what they cannot do, what I accept and what I do not accept. That clear declaration of control and power from Israel over the United States of America is really scary to come out to the media and say it so clearly. And because of that, for Benjamin Netanyahu, it's important to continue the war on at least one front, because this is how he survives. Without war, he cannot survive. Therefore, if there is a deal between the Americans and the Israel and the Iranians, accordingly, the Iranians will not enrich uranium, let's say for 10 years, like the deal with Barack Obama. Then Donald Trump can say, well, I'm satisfied, and Benjamin Netanyahu can accept this conclusion because they both, Netanyahu and Trump, failed to destroy Iran and to change the ruling system. And for that, the reward that Netanyahu has is to continue the war on Lebanon. But is he going to achieve any of the objectives? Of course not, because he did not achieve his objective with Hamas. Hamas still exists in Gaza, is still in control of Gaza. Iran did not fall, it fought back, and Donald Trump said he wants to participate to the selection of the new leader, which he did not, but it means he accepted that the same ruling system remains in place, and he has no choice to accept or not, because Iran defended itself well enough to impose its own ruling system on its own people. And the only thing remains Hezbollah because of the weakness of the Lebanese government. Now, it doesn't mean Netanyahu is going to succeed in Lebanon. He will have some tactical victories, like he can take the city of Bint Jbeil. This is where the late Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah came out and described Israel as weaker than the spider web. And Netanyahu can come out and brag about it, but he's no longer taken seriously by his own people. For the first time, when he had a speech in the last 48 hours, the Israeli media did not report his words, did not say what he said, because they fed up, they don't believe him, they see him repeating exactly the same thing over and over again and achieving nothing. For that, we see a complete shift of dynamic in the world. The Americans are angry because they see their administration lying to them. They voted for Donald Trump because he self-declared himself as the peace president. They see that the ruler of the United States of America in relation to foreign policy is a foreign prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is telling the world how he is leading the United States by the nose. And then we see the United States losing its allies in Europe and in the Middle East. In Europe, they're not shy to tell off Donald Trump and say, we're not participating to your war. In the Middle East, they don't say it because they have a different culture, but they're doing it. They go to Pakistan, to Turkey, to China to make deals with them, security deals. And then they look at the Americans in a way, well, how dare you talk to us now or trying to impose anything? We're not going to go against you. Otherwise, the Americans can topple all these regimes, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the Emirates, and can change them under the flag of color revolution and democracy. But the Americans have lost their weight in the Middle East, and they've lost their weight in Europe. Europe today, particularly the United Kingdom, said to the Americans, no, I am not participating to patrolling the Strait of Hormuz. NATO is not going to go to support America. These are big decisions that were taken during the war, and this is a huge shift in the future of the United States and its hegemony when a most powerful country failed to destroy and to control and submit a nation under 47 years of sanctions in this way and then sit around the negotiation tables like he has achieved nothing, because what the Americans are taking around the negotiation table today are more or less the same they took during the last negotiations in Oman just a few days before the war. And that was said by the British member of the UK Foreign Ministry, who was an expert and present during the meeting, and who said that Iran has never given what we have received in this dialogue of peace talk, and that was really good to take and grab. And the Americans did not do that because they were driven by the Israelis to go to war. Therefore, we see today the Americans accepting, and they will accept on the table what Iran has already offered. But with one thing that is new today, America has lost all its allies, or at least the allies can say no to America. The allies and mean European and Middle Easterns, and the limit of the US forces globally. China has looked very carefully at what happened in the Middle East and what is the capability of the US to tame and destroy Iran, what the US are capable of, and the way they use the force and how they escalate from military objectives to civilian objectives to destroy the civilizations, to show how desperate the Americans were to achieve some of the objectives that they did not. So all that today has changed the whole dynamic of the geopolitics around the world, and will have consequences for decades to come.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. And these consequences are indeed mounting, especially given that Iran is saying that it hasn't shown all its cards. It's talking about having weapons at its disposal if it has to restart any kind of significant kinetic action against the United States and or Israel. That these weapons can be easily unveiled. It's also promising to ensure the closure of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which for now the last week, including the last 24 48 hours, this has caused a lot of concern among observers, especially those observers with connections and attention to the oil markets. Maybe you can talk about what exactly you believe in terms of the strategy and the flow and movement of this war. What exactly is the not just the significance, but I guess what is the possible trigger for the closure of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait? Because that, in my estimation, at least what I've seen in terms of how people are talking about it, how observers are talking about that, it would be a massive catastrophe for both the Strait of Hormuz to be under the concerted and assertive control of Iran, and for the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to be controlled and enforced in that way, likely by Ansar Allah, maybe also Iran too. So, your thoughts on this?
What's a question? Sorry.
Oh, what would be the trigger possibly of the closure of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and why is it significant to, I guess, bring up? Because there's a lot of concern, I think, by observers, and Iran has said that it has this ready to happen if things get out of hand with the United States again.
So the Strait of Hormuz has never been closed. It was the passage was reduced, and particularly anything related to the United States and Israel did not cross the Strait of Hormuz. But Iran showed also other things. They threatened to close the Bab el Mandeb. And Hezbollah showed us surface to surface missiles saying that it has attacked an Israeli vessels in the Mediterranean, but showing that the Mediterranean can also be subject to a closure in case the war escalates. So these messages were received by the Americans. The US administration was taken by surprise. This is what Donald Trump told us from the first few days. They said, Trump said, we did not expect the Iranians to react against the Arab countries. And then he said, we did not expect the Americans to attack us in the Gulf. He did not expect the Americans to put a limit on the passage of the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians just said, oh, we launched several thousands of mines in the water, and we don't know where they are because we just putting them there, which is not entirely accurate because they have mines that work with artificial intelligence, they have electronic mines, and they have traditional mines. And they have exactly the map, but they are saying to the Americans, well, actually, if you want to be tough on us, then you will not be able to cross the Strait of Hormuz, in particular when NATO and Europe is not helping you. And even if they do, they have to slow down and they will be exposed to our missiles. So these are the messages that the Americans have received. And I think, in my opinion, this is why they are not acting too harshly, still not excluding the fact that they can still try and attack a vessel or a tanker or anything, but they will not be as aggressive as they wanted us to believe when they have taken this decision. So all these elements that Iran throw in the available in the market, saying this is what I have, this is your limitations. You will not be able to cross without us, and we can tell you where is the safe passage, and for that we dictate the policy here. This is why the Americans did not really provoke further the Iranians until today. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow and what kind of leverage Donald Trump wants to bring out of his hat before the meeting, thinking that this can be used as a leverage against Iran. He forgot in 2018 that he said, I'm waiting by the phone for the Iranians to call me, and they never called. He's still not really relying on his memory on how the Iranians function.
Is there any act of intimidation? Because it feels like what, or at least the facts are, that the Trump administration, Donald Trump himself, has taken an approach of intimidation leading to outcomes in talks, right? The more you punish, the harder you hit, the scarier you are, the bigger you are, the more you bully, that will lead to some kind of outcome in talks. Is there, do you see any scenario where that could work at all with Iran? And then that seems to mean, if not, there are no options left for the Trump administration other than maybe two in front of him: continue the war, face the consequences there, continue at a more full scale level, or begin talking seriously about what a reasonable settlement would look like, not just for the United States, which always cares about itself only, but the Iranians. Iran, your thoughts?
Well, I think Donald Trump renewed the ceasefire and he said we add additional days to the ceasefire. So he's not really trying to provoke Iran into the resume of the fight because although we see the gathering of forces, when we see generals resigning in the United States or asked to resign, it means the war plans are not working. There's a big difference between Donald Trump saying, I want to occupy an island or several islands in Iran, and being able to protect them and keep the control of these islands. This will cost a lot of lives, and the Americans will not be able to stabilize themselves in these islands. So the invasion idea has dropped. So what remains? When the Americans moved to destroy energy plants, it means they cannot find any more military objectives, although Iran is still firing missiles on the Gulf, on the Americans, in the Gulf, and on the Israelis. Therefore, the Americans have shown their limitations in this war, and the Iranians have learned the lesson how to deal with an overwhelming superpower in control of the sky, more or less. But it shows how Iran, with 1,648,000 square kilometers, can really defend itself. So that option is off the table. Destroying the energy, well, the Arabs told the Americans that if you do that, then the Iranians promised to destroy our energy. And the energy in the Middle East is extremely fragile because they have cost billions of dollars, but they need only a few drones. Each one costs $10,000 to destroy them. This is the damage that was caused to the Qatari gas facilities that Qatar said has spent $26 billion, and then two drones caused a damage of $20 billion. So this is not in the advantage of the Gulf countries, and the Gulf countries really are fed up of these irrational decisions that are not going to achieve anything in Iran. If these objectives can be reachable and achievable, then the Arabs would support Donald Trump. They don't like Iran. But because they are not achievable, because the Iranians show they can defend themselves, because Israel and the Americans tried everything in their power and they have exhausted the bank of objectives, this is where the Arabs say, no, stop. It is important for you to stop now because we cannot sustain further damage. So there is a ceasefire. So, what other leverage can the Americans do? Impose more sanctions? Well, Iran is drowning with sanctions since 1980, the first sanction imposed by Jimmy Carter, and it has never stopped. On every single new US president, there were sanctions until Donald Trump imposed maximum sanctions. Joe Biden found something else and then imposed it. Trump now is doing the same. And now with this blockade that is not working really, because it transferred the battle into Asia when the Americans have shown their limitation against Iran, and they certainly don't want to start another war with China or with anybody else. This is why I doubt the Americans can really impose themselves with a new leverage, but to say, well, okay, well, now we can effectively block your oil. And the Iranian will say, well, you're blocking the Chinese oil because we're selling it. And I don't know if people remember when Donald Trump said, I'm going to give the Iranians the possibility to sell their oil. They have 400 million barrel of oil in the sea. And Iran said, no, thank you. They all sold to China. So we don't have anything to sell. So even there, Donald Trump showed that he can give concessions on sanctions, on oil, on the energy, on the asset that Iran has frozen in several banks around the world. We're talking about dozens of billions of dollars. So what we see today, and here I conclude, is Donald Trump giving much more concessions in this war than before the war started, and including in the Iranian deterrence agenda or list, the Strait of Hormuz.
And it even extends, Elijah, out of the theater, at least the direct theater with Iran, the conflict, the war, the economic war. Even, I mean, I think the Trump administration just extended sanctions relief against Russian tankers and Russian oil being sold on the market. So that that shows that, yeah, the concessions are even deeper, that there's obviously a major crisis. And I'm curious if you have, given your long experience covering wars in the region, especially in West Asia, if there's a precedent here that's being set, because it's hard for me to remember past back when I was very young and the war on terror began, for example, a situation where the United States is step toward full scale war and this massive escalation over the last 6 weeks, leading to a scenario where it seems like every the United States makes has the potential to trigger a massive global economic catastrophe that has essentially already been building up and people are facing consequences for it. Is there a precedent for this? And is this changing the nature of war itself, given that the United States is so dependent upon it? Israel basically lives and dies on it. If it doesn't have it, it's not going to really have much of a future if it has one. Um, yeah, I'm curious on your thoughts about this.
You have raised many points. Let me uh, tackle differently your questions. So, first of all, we've seen the limitations of the Americans' military power. The Americans can destroy any country if they want to. They have a lot of bombs, a lot of air force they have capabilities beyond belief. Yes, but then what? Destruction is not achieving objectives. This is not Venezuela we're dealing with in Iran, but even Afghanistan. The Iranians uh, were dealing with Afghanistan in the past, and they had bad relationship with the Afghani until the Americans came and restored the relationship between Iran and Afghanistan. And the Americans moved into Afghanistan and removed the Taliban from Kabul because Taliban left Kabul. And after 20 years, they gave it back to the Taliban. In Iraq, it's a catastrophe. Iraq is not an independent country. The Iraqis cannot select their prime minister. They don't have their oil coming to their accounts because it goes to the federal bank in the United States. They have the military that the Americans control the sky, allow the Israelis to come and bomb the Iraqi security forces, Hashtag. So they are occupying the country and they don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to run it since 2003. So, yes, they toppled Saddam Hussein, but then what do they do with the country? And this is exactly what they wanted to do with Iran. What do they do with Iran? It is there are so many ethnic groups, so many resources in the country that the chaos will spread on all borders. And what do they do then? What they create havoc in the world without any objective. They say, okay, we go and destroy. Well, then what? You go and destroy, and what is the consequences? Do you have any plan? No. On the third day, Donald Trump said, I did not expect. And he repeated this word 3 or 4 times in 2 weeks about so many other things that Iran reacted. So, yes, the use of power, it shows the power of the side using it. But then people need to think what is behind it? What is the objective that this country or this entity or this army wants to achieve, and if it is achievable or not? And so far, we have seen Israel incapable of achieving any objectives against non state actors and state actors, which shows the limitation of the power when the culture and the ideology is misunderstood. Now, if you look at what Donald Trump is doing in this war, I'm going to give you another aspect in another window, the relationship with Europe. Donald Trump gave Russia the possibility to sell the oil for over $100 a barrel. Why he's doing so? Because he's seeking revenge against the Europeans. He's saying to the Europeans, you don't want to help me. I'm going to make Russia rich again by selling Russian oil in the market when the Europeans have been trying since 22nd of February 2022, the beginning of the war in Ukraine, to destroy the Russian economy. And Donald Trump is saying to the Europeans, you are going to pay the price of what he considered a misbehavior. So, my point in telling you that is we have the most powerful person on earth leading the most powerful country and the most powerful army reacting out of anger. This is not how, not even if I want to write an article, I can't write it out of anger. I have to remain a bit balanced. So you see a leader of the world reacting out of anger, damaging his allies and his enemy, but for no objectives. He doesn't have a long term policy. Where is he taking the world? Where is he taking America? He cannot answer this question. One day he is a Jesus, another day he is uh, a winner of a peacemaker, and then he wants to win prizes that he doesn't deserve. And then he doesn't know how to run the domestic policy, saying, I don't care about the Medicare of the American people. Why is he a president if he's not going to look after the domestic policy and the foreign policy? This kind of leader is attacking other countries around the world and creating havoc in the world economy, where now in Europe, we have to pay the gas 37% extra. But the damage is not the day the war, this war stops, then the damage will stop. Absolutely not. For the next 6 months, we will continue paying the additional bill and the additional energy because of these kind of decisions. Now, if you look at the interest of the United States and the interest of Israel, you cannot be the president of America and go and fulfill the objectives of another one like Benjamin Netanyahu because these objectives are incompatible and you want to please him. It doesn't work because Benjamin Netanyahu wants chaos, and chaos cannot rule the world because there are population who will starve or will migrating, the crime will increase, the poverty will increase, the lack of goods, food is reaching and impossible prices. All that because Donald Trump was convinced by Benjamin Netanyahu to go to war without any objective. This is what we are seeing today.
Yeah, and maybe finally, as we get close to the end here, Elijah, um, it is quite the contradiction what you're spelling out, especially in terms of interests, right? Because I have seen and I have also argued that you know the U.S. obviously backs Israel because there are many in the at least the top brass that see Israel as not just ideologically a friend and all of this, if you can even call it that, but also that Israel will serve certain military and maybe expansionist and hegemonic goals. But at the same time, the way that it goes about this partnership ends up leading to something like what we've seen the last 12 months here, the last 6 to 10 months, the June war, and now this one, where it seems like the outcomes, and this has been maybe true since the last 20 plus years, the outcomes of these wars end up with the United States actually having to reduce its presence, reduce its influence, even talk about and pander to the need to get out of the region. And this war has shown that, yeah, the further that you go down this path of chaos, like what ultimately the escalation ladder for the United States was going to lead to, then you have a major problem with the markets. You have a major problem with the Gulf allies. All of this, you have the potential for U.S. interests to actually be decimated, reduced. They have been, but it could get even worse. Your reactions to this, because I think this is kind of the material side of what you were just saying there about how U.S. interests are actually impeded. Even the imperial interests are actually impeded by this pursuit of chaos. Oh, sorry about that. Hold on. Continue.
Some people think that Donald Trump is out to follow the money, or he wants to control the energy, uh, or he wants to be a great man. But it is not that easy to control the energy. He cannot control the energy because he's losing the control over the energy. Of course, he can make a bit of money, and his friends around him can make money on the speculation when he comes out on the Monday before the opening of the market saying, well, this is I am talking to the Iranians and I'm reaching a deal. So he can play with the prices. And also that is illegal, by the way. However, this is not the control of energy. Because today, those who control the energy in the Middle East are shifting toward the yuan and China. They want alternative markets. They want alternative relationship. So he is losing the energy. He's not after the money for the United States because if you look at the cost of this war, it's humongous. He's spending 5 billions every 2 days or 3 days. So for in 40 days, you can imagine how much money he has spent and what is going to happen to the world industry and world economy and energy. Is he today in a position to control more energy than he was before? Well, what happened was Venezuela, the Venezuelan oil is heavy, and it is one of the largest reserve around the world, but he needs to invest a lot of money to make it work. And in fact, all the big companies, the big American companies, refuse to go to Venezuela and start business because they want laws to be changed. They want refineries to be working, and that costs billions of dollars. They're not ready to invest now with the unstable market. So no, people are not really very accurate when they say he's after the money, he's after the energy. He says so, and he allows us to think so. But what he has done with the energy today, he did not control it. Today he is not in a better control of the energy than he was 40 days ago with the war on Iran. On the contrary, he made the oil producer countries richer than they were before 40 days, despite all the damage that they have suffered from, because their gas and oil is much more expensive today than before the war when it was around the $60, and today is navigating, it has reached 120, 110, 100, 96, 92, and then 100. So they are making an awful lot of money, but not Donald Trump. He is not in control. So what he likes us with all his theaters to show us that he is in control, actually he's not. He's confused. He doesn't know what he's saying. He doesn't know what to do next. He's trying to keep the attention always focused on what he's doing, maybe for the Epstein file reason, maybe for other reasons. Maybe this is the only thing he knows what to do. This is why he goes and put the photo of Jesus and put himself in this position, or he criticizes the Pope. You criticizing the representative of 2.5 billion Christian around the world. Why is he doing so? Again, attracting attention. This is not a policy. This is not something that the American people can benefit from. People need to shift away from comedies, from theaters, and go to the essence, what they have achieved, what Donald Trump has achieved to them. Are their life today better than yesterday, than a year and a half ago? Today, are they making more money? Do they pay less money on the utilities and the goods they are buying? Is the world a safer place? Every act he has done has been positive and constructive to the American people and to the rest of the world? Well, the answer on all levels is no. So people need really to think carefully before they vote for a president next time.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Well, Elijah, it was great to be with you. I want to make sure everybody knows that your website, ElijahMagnier.com, is in the video description where they can check out all of your work and support and subscribe. Everybody hit the like button before you go. That helps boost the show even after we are done here. I want to thank everyone who gave a super chat. I want to thank everyone who watched, all the members, and of course, all the moderators who helped out with today's show. I'll be back very soon, everyone. I'm in Beijing. I'm very jet lagged. I gotta go. I gotta like run out of here. I want to thank Elijah again. We're gonna head out together, and I'll be back very soon. And hopefully, I'll be able to get some kind of walking around China going soon. I've been messing with their internet and trying to figure that out. Without further ado, everybody, take care. I'll see you guys soon, and bye bye.